Before the sun clears the horizon, the greatest city in the world is already awake. A harbor crowded with the masts of 1,000 ships. Wide streets of white marble running arrow-straight to the sea. Temples and palaces and libraries gleaming in the first gray light. And out on a spit of rock at the harbor mouth, one of the 7 wonders of the world. The Pharos, a lighthouse taller than anything the ancient world had ever built, its great mirror flame still burning against the dawn, cutting a line of gold across the water for the incoming grain ships. This is Alexandria, the richest, most learned, most dazzling city on earth. Not a temple town on the Nile, a Greek metropolis on the edge of the Mediterranean, built to be the brain and the treasury of the world. And this is where she was made. Welcome back to History with Rohrmann, where history comes alive one story at a time. Last time, we cleared away the myth. We said, forget the movie. The Egyptian seductress with the snake and the barge is a legend, most of it invented by the enemies who destroyed her. Underneath it was someone far more interesting. A Greek queen, a brilliant head of state, one of the sharpest political minds of the ancient world. That was the promise. Now we keep it. Now we tell the true story in order from the beginning. And the true story does not begin with a barge, or a snake, or a Roman general. It begins 300 years earlier, in this city of marble and light. Because to understand Cleopatra, you have to understand what she inherited. And what she inherited was a paradox. The most beautiful kingdom in the world, and one of the most poisoned. A golden throne that her family no longer really controlled. A crown that had already killed most of the people who wore it. This is the story of that inheritance. How the most fabulous kingdom of the age became a puppet of Rome, and how a teenage girl came to be sitting on its throne, already deep in the shadow of the power that would eventually swallow her whole. Let's go back to the beginning, to the man who started it all. In the year 323 BC, in the city of Babylon, Alexander the Great died. He was 32 years old, and he had conquered most of the known world, from Greece to the edge of India. And then, with no clear heir and no plan, he was simply gone, and he left behind the largest empire anyone had ever assembled, with nobody to rule it. What followed was a scramble. Alexander's generals, hardened Macedonian soldiers who had marched with him to the ends of the earth, turned on the empire and on each other. They carved it up like a carcass. For decades they fought, betrayed, and murdered their way across 3 continents, each grabbing whatever piece of Alexander's world he could hold. One of those generals was a shrewd, careful man named Ptolemy. He had been one of Alexander's closest companions and his boyhood friend. And while the others reached for the impossible dream of holding the whole empire together, Ptolemy did something smarter. He looked at the map, and he chose one prize, the richest and most defensible of them all. He took Egypt. Egypt was perfect. It was fabulously wealthy, fed by the flooding of the Nile that grew more grain than anywhere else on earth. It was easy to defend, sealed off by deserts on almost every side. And it was ancient, a land of gods and pharaohs stretching back thousands of years, a country that knew how to be ruled. Ptolemy walked in, took control and settled down. And in 305 BC, he stopped pretending to serve anyone else. He put a crown on his own head and declared himself king. Ptolemy the first, Pharaoh of Egypt. That was the birth of a dynasty. For nearly 300 years, his descendants, the Ptolemies, would rule Egypt from Alexandria. 15 kings, all of them named Ptolemy. A whole line of queens, many of them named Cleopatra. The last of them, the 7th Cleopatra in her family, is the one the world remembers. And here is the thing that everyone gets wrong. Across all those centuries, the Ptolemies never became Egyptian. They stayed defiantly, stubbornly Greek. They spoke Greek in their court. They read Greek poetry and studied Greek philosophy. They built a Greek city and filled it with Greek art. They ruled over millions of Egyptians while remaining, culturally, a foreign occupying elite, Macedonian royalty sitting on the throne of the pharaohs. And the crown jewel of their kingdom, The wonder they built to announce themselves to the world was Alexandria itself. It had been founded by Alexander, but it was the Ptolemies who made it magnificent. Within a century, it was the largest and most cosmopolitan city on the planet, home to perhaps 500,000 people, Greeks and Egyptians and Jews and traders from every shore of the Mediterranean. Its harbors were the busiest in the world. And it was rich beyond imagining because whoever controlled Egypt controlled grain, and the whole Mediterranean was hungry. But Alexandria was not just a marketplace. It was meant to be the mind of the world. At its heart stood the museum, a great institution dedicated to the Muses, the first real research center in history, where the finest scholars alive were paid by the king simply to think. And attached to it was the Great Library, the most ambitious project of the ancient mind, an attempt to collect every book ever written, in any language under one roof. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the accumulated knowledge of humanity, gathered in one place. Geometry was refined here. The size of the earth was measured here. Poetry, medicine, astronomy, engineering, all of it flowered under the Pharos and its light. This was the inheritance, a city of marble and books and sea light, one of the true summits of human civilization. And it was rotting from the inside, because behind the gleaming facade, the dynasty that built all this beauty was one of the most dysfunctional and murderous ruling families in history. And a great deal of that came down to one habit that the Ptolemies had borrowed from the old pharaohs and taken to a horrifying extreme. They married their own siblings. Brother wed sister, generation after generation, to keep the bloodline pure and the throne inside the family. The result, over centuries, was a genetic catastrophe and something worse. It turned the royal family into a nest of vipers. Because when your brother is also your husband, and your sister is also your rival for the throne, family and politics become the same murderous thing. The history of the Ptolemies is a numbing catalog of it. Kings murdering their brothers, mothers murdering their sons, a queen who had her own children killed, husbands and wives who were also siblings, poisoning each other for a crown. By Cleopatra's time, the family tree was less a tree than a snake pit, and spilling royal blood had become almost routine, the ordinary background music of a Ptolemaic reign. So this was the throne waiting for her, fabulously rich, impossibly cultured, and soaked in the blood of her own relatives. But there was one more shadow over it, and it was the biggest of all. Because while the Ptolemies had been busy poisoning each other in their marble palace, out across the sea a new power had been rising. A hard, disciplined, relentlessly ambitious republic. Rome. Over the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, Rome had grown from a city into a monster, swallowing the entire Mediterranean one kingdom at a time. Greece, conquered. Carthage, erased. The kingdoms of the East, one after another, either crushed or turned into obedient clients. And Egypt, that fat and glittering prize, sat there in the middle of it all, watching the shadow grow. By the time we reach Cleopatra's father, the truth was undeniable. Egypt was still fabulously wealthy, still independent on paper, still ruled by its Greek kings. But it survived only because Rome, for the moment, found it more useful to keep it alive than to devour it. Egypt had become, in everything but name, a client of Rome. A cash cow, a kingdom that reigned only as long as Rome allowed it to. And nobody embodied that humiliation more completely than Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII. History has not been kind to him, and neither were his own people. They nicknamed him Elites, the Flute-Player, a mocking title for a king who was said to prefer playing music and holding drunken festivals to the hard work of ruling. But whatever his failings, Ptolemy XII understood one brutal fact more clearly than almost anyone. In this new world, an Egyptian king ruled only with Rome's permission, and so he set out to buy it. He spent staggering sums bribing powerful Romans to recognize him and protect his throne. He borrowed fortunes from Roman financiers to pay those bribes, mortgaging the wealth of Egypt to the very power that was strangling it. He made himself officially a friend and ally of the Roman people, which was a polite way of saying a client who paid for protection. And it was not enough. In 58 BC, his own subjects, furious at the taxes he squeezed out of them to fund his Roman bribes, and humiliated by his groveling, rose up and threw him off the throne. Ptolemy XII, king of the richest land in the world, was forced to flee his own country. And where did he flee to? To Rome, of course. He went to the very city that was bleeding him dry, and he begged. He lobbied. He borrowed even more money at ruinous rates to buy a Roman army that would put him back on his throne. And eventually, in 55 BC, it worked. A Roman general marched into Egypt with his legions, crushed the resistance, and restored Ptolemy XII to power at the point of a Roman sword. Think about what that meant. The Pharaoh of Egypt, heir to Alexander, ruler of a 300-year-old dynasty, now sat on his throne only because Roman soldiers had put him there and Roman soldiers kept him there. A garrison of Roman troops stayed behind in Alexandria to make sure he behaved. The independence of Egypt was, by this point, a beautiful and very expensive fiction. And a young girl watched all of it happen, because Ptolemy XII had a daughter. Sharp, watchful, and by every account extraordinary, she had been born around 69 BC, which made her a child through her father's disgrace, his exile, and his humiliating restoration by Roman arms. She saw her father grovel. She saw the Roman soldiers in the streets of her city. She learned, in the most personal way imaginable, the central lesson of her age, that the survival of Egypt now ran directly through Rome. That lesson would shape every decision she ever made. That girl was Cleopatra, and she was not like the rest of her family. In a dynasty of dissolute kings and murderous queens, Cleopatra was, above all, brilliant. She grew up in the greatest library in the world, and she used it. She was ferociously well-educated, steeped in Greek literature, philosophy, mathematics, medicine, rhetoric, and she had a gift for languages that was legendary even in antiquity. It was said she could speak as many as 9 and negotiate with foreign envoys directly, without interpreters. But her most remarkable act was one that none of her ancestors had ever bothered with. In 300 years, not a single Ptolemy had learned to speak Egyptian, the language of the millions of people they ruled. Cleopatra was the first. She learned the language of her subjects. She studied their gods and their customs. She understood, in a way her family never had, that a Greek dynasty perched on top of Egypt could not survive forever by ignoring Egypt. She set out to be not just a Greek queen in a marble palace, but a pharaoh her Egyptian people could believe in. It was intelligence and it was strategy, and it made her dangerous. But intelligence does not protect you from your own family. And in 51 BC, everything changed. Ptolemy XII, the flute player, finally died, still owing enormous debts to Rome. And in his will, he left the throne of Egypt not to one heir, but to 2, in the poisonous old Ptolemaic tradition. He left it jointly to his daughter Cleopatra, now about 18 years old, and to her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, a boy of about 10. And, following the custom of their house, the 18-year-old woman and the 10-year-old boy were to rule together as husband and wife. Sister and brother, married, co-monarchs of Egypt. It was, from the very first day, a recipe for war. Because a 10-year-old king does not rule. He is ruled. And behind the boy Ptolemy stood a faction of powerful men from the royal court who intended to govern in his name and pocket the power for themselves. There was Pothinus, a court eunuch of enormous influence, cold and calculating, the real brain of the faction. There was Achilles, the hard commander of the army. And there was Theodotus, the boy king's tutor, a smooth and ruthless rhetorician. Together, this palace clique held the child king like a puppet, and they had no intention of sharing power with his clever, ambitious older sister. But Cleopatra had no intention of being anyone's junior partner. From the start, she moved to rule, in fact, not just in name. She had official documents issued under her own name alone. She had coins struck with only her face on them, dropping her little brother entirely, a bold and public declaration of who really held power. She was signaling to Egypt and to Rome that she was the true monarch and the boy was a formality. It was a direct challenge to Pothinus and his faction, and they answered it. Over the next 2 years, the court clique moved against her, chipping away at her authority, turning the machinery of the palace against her, isolating her. And they were powerful and she was young, and eventually they won the first round. Around 49 BC, they drove Cleopatra out. Forced from her own capital, stripped of her power, the Queen of Egypt became a fugitive. But she did not flee into hiding, and she did not give up. She did what a true monarch does. She went east to the desert frontier near Syria, and she began on her own authority to raise an army. An exiled queen, barely 20 years old, gathering soldiers in the wilderness, preparing to march back and take her throne by force. The struggle between the sister and the brother was about to become open war. And that is the board set for the game of her life. A brilliant young queen in exile with an army at her back. A boy king in Alexandria, controlled by a ruthless court faction. A kingdom fabulously rich and desperately weak, its independence hanging by a thread, propped up and bled dry by Rome. 2 Ptolemies about to tear Egypt apart, both of them knowing that whoever won the crown would still, in the end, have to answer to the masters across the sea. And then, into this Egyptian family war, the whole weight of Rome was about to come crashing down. Because at that very moment, far to the north, Rome had turned on itself. The Republic had exploded into a colossal civil war between its 2 greatest men, and one of them had just lost everything. Pompey the Great, once the most powerful man in the world, had been shattered in battle and was now running for his life. And of all the places on earth, he was running toward Egypt, toward Alexandria, toward the boy king and his court, hoping for shelter. And close behind him, in relentless pursuit, came the victor, the most powerful man in the world, a Roman general named Julius Caesar. 2 Roman titans and their war were about to land on Cleopatra's shore. For an exiled queen with an army but no throne, it was catastrophe, and it was opportunity, and they were the same thing. The most powerful man in the world was coming to Alexandria, and she was going to gamble everything on reaching him.